Hmm. Now I'm struggling for a.
I'm here.
We'll
How about what do I think is next for Last House?
go with that. So, Mark, what do you think is next? Hello and welcome to Josiah is Right. Today we're going to talk about a film that it's truly an iconic film, cult classic. It's that word gets thrown around a lot, and not a lot of films deserve that title. But this is a film that absolutely does, and I'm really excited to be joined once again by Marc Shefler, who joined me before to talk about his career, sort of as mostly a writer. And this is, if you're going to act in one movie, this is the kind of movie to be in. So say hello, Mark.
Hello. Hello, Josiah. Nice to see you again.
It's
Uh,
great to have you.
thanks for having me back. Um, yeah, last time we spoke, I was at a resort in Pipa, Colombia, uh, at the beginning of a 10-week trip that my wife just ended a couple of weeks ago. And now I'm back in my house and in my own chair and in my own office and in my own kitchen and in my own everything. I'm happier now.
That's a long trip for anything, no matter where you are, I think, right?
Well, we would do it. We're already planning the next one.
Yeah.
My wife's family lives there, right? So a couple of years ago, we just uh, before the pandemic, uh, we made the decision that she wasn't going to work anymore, and she was we were going to be able to go and spend time with her family at will. So
That's cool. I always joke with my poor wife, as we discussed in the previous episode, we're both from Pittsburgh originally. So the only vacation she ever gets to go on is to go to
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. So, but at least we live in Southern California, so you're not like coming from like Montana to Pittsburgh or
Right.
something.
Right.
You're starting with a better destination. So the film today we're talking about is Last House on the Left, released August 30th, 1972. So that just passes the 50th anniversary.
Years. Wow.
Yeah. And as we record this, it's my mom's birthday as well today. And this day about 9 years ago was the day we got my dog. So we're recording September 20th, just for the record. But crazy, 50 years, Mark. What does that feel like?
You know, it's odd, man, because David Hess and Fred Lincoln and the rest of the cast and crew watched the film at a screening that they had, a cast and crew screening at a Filmways post house in New York. And David and Freddie and I walked out of it, looked at each other, laughed and said, "Hey, it was great. We met because we'll be friends forever," and we were, right? But no one's ever going to come and see this piece of shit. And you know, that's really what we thought, 100%. And what happened was, I think about that while in the intervening time since we spoke last. Late in August, a friend of mine sent me a flyer from the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And the flyer was promoting an exhibition, a cinema exhibition that they were doing, the theme of which was films that have an actual visceral effect on the human body, right? And I opened the link, and they were doing 6 films over 2 weeks, and one of them was Last House on the Left. And I could not fucking believe that this film was now certified art as part of an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, one of the finest museums in the world, right?
Yeah.
I just I just literally was dumbfounded by that. It continues to dumbfound me. You said something in your introduction. If you're only going to be in one film, this would be the kind of film to be in, right? And you're 100% right. I mean, I've done a couple of other things, but this, for the most part, is the only big film of any note that I've ever done. But you know, I look at it and I say, well, the film is part of a film history because it began Wes Craven's career. and it was, the grandfather of the modern slasher movie. There's several reasons why Last House is tightly woven in the fabric of American film history, right? And I was a small part of that, and admittedly a small part of it, but still, I'm there.
And so quickly, yeah, just the kind of the key people that made this movie. Just two that I want to mention. Obviously, we'll talk about other people as we go, but directed by Wes Craven. And I grew up in the '80s, and there was no name associated. It's like almost like he made the name Wes Craven up to then to become a horror director. That just sounds like the name of the guy who would direct this movie and direct the Freddy Krueger movies, and just terrify me throughout my whole childhood.
Ironically, a soft-spoken, uh, delightful, sweet man,
And
right?
then, of course, produced by Sean Cunningham, who then would go on to the other side of the slasher movie with the Friday the 13th. And it's funny, I didn't even realize that because, of course, I associate this movie with Wes Craven,
Mm-hmm.
but and you kind of think, oh, this is the sort of the birth of the slasher movie on that side. But it's like, no, this is in every way, like this is the movie from this all springs and goes out from this one movie that I just didn't even occur to me. I never realized that. And the interesting thing is, so growing up, I was not a horror movie fan as a little kid. I remember there was a birthday party when I was about 8 or 10 years old, and it was a sleepover, and all the kids were watching horror movies downstairs in the basement. I don't know what they were watching, the '80s, like things like Child's Play and probably the Freddy movies, and I'm sure the Friday the 13th stuff. But I was upstairs with the kids. It was this kid named Charlie. It was his birthday party. I was upstairs with his sister playing board games to avoid the horror movie. So I was that kid. But fortunately, as I grew up a teenager and then college, I started to appreciate them as the art that they are, and especially when a film like this can have cultural significance. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting because a film, there's a few films like this, but this one in particular was, you could say that it was largely viewed as, for lack of a better word, as smut, as appalling. And it had that reputation so much so that I was afraid to watch it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I saw this film until I was in my 20s.
Wow.
And that was, going to film school and stuff. And it was one of those things that I kept putting it off for some reason because it had such a reputation of being so unlike anything else. And it's different when you
It
watch it in 2022, but I can only imagine seeing this film in 1972.
was a mind fuck, man. Like people would stare at the screen, and they were, hypnotized. It was like that, like Star Trek and that tractor beam shit, right? They were caught, and they didn't even realize it, right? And because the film doesn't have an excessive running time, it's kind of over before you know it, right? And it's compelling enough that it keeps people locked in, and it's over in a blink, because that's the way, that was Wes. Wes was an interesting guy. I mean, in that time, he somebody who becomes a really well-known director, to find out who they really are, you not just with Wes, you go back to their first films. Look at, I mean, even Spielberg with Duel, right? You could tell that this guy had
Yeah.
a sense of that tension, right? Of how to do that cinematically. And that's not experience when it's your first film. That's just your instinct, right? So you could tell on the set, for as little as we all knew, right, that Wes had a vision of what he wanted, a very soft-spoken way of getting there, but the soft-spokenness of his personal being was not to be confused with the violence. And it was a real dichotomy, because Wes was really a sweet guy. I mean, he was,
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen him through the years, so I knew him at the very beginning and towards the end, right? So it was a weird combination of things that made Last House what it was. I mean, number one, first and foremost, it was unlike anything anyone had ever done. Number two, it was a television campaign that no one had ever seen before, an ad campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, and the most important thing, Roger Ebert's review. You know, that's what did it, man. There's no question in my mind. I look back and the film had 30 prints, roughly a number I remember made. Sean
Mm-hmm.
delivered 30 prints to Hallmark Releasing. They put it in their drive-ins, and it was doing exactly what Hallmark expected it to do, uh, attracting the audience that it wanted. It's late night drive-in, second feature, scary feature on a date. It was getting some interesting response because the people who had seen it were like freaked out, fuck out. They were just, this wasn't, Frankenstein meets the Abbott and Costello. This was a real fucking in your face movie, right? So then Ebert's review comes out. Mr. Ebert's review comes out. And like the next day, Sean is scrambling in his office trying to get 1,000 prints made because he got an order for 1,000 prints. And this was back in the day where you couldn't deliver them electronically. You had to get the physical prints made, right?
Yeah.
So he was calling this, this lab and that lab and this, trying to cobble together 1,000 prints. And I don't know how to explain what that's like. Like when the film was released in the drive-in, Hess and I could walk around New York and nobody gave a shit. We were just two guys, right? We were just two guys walking around. Like 2 days after Ebert's review, New York City was papered with Last House posters, and pictures of Hess were up like everywhere. Every subway, every bus, every place we looked, there was that one shot of Hess with the machete, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we couldn't go anywhere. People were staring and running across the street. We lived at Central. Hess and I were sharing an apartment. We lived at 85th Street in Central Park West. People would see him and they would run across, disappear into the park, or would run out of the park. It was weird. It was like odd. We'd get on a subway, the fucking car would clear. In New York, a crowded city, the subway cars would clear.
I can imagine though, like if you saw that movie and then see the two of you together, not
Yeah,
just to see
yeah.
like one or the other of you, but to see the two of you together.
Yeah, I
That's
guess that's a point. That's a fair point.
you're like, is this like it's just like some post traumatic stress experience from hallucinating this, and you see these guys. Um, it's also interesting, just a tie that I was thinking about that is around that time. You're not you personally, but you have a few years before this another very very famous sort of cult horror film out of Pittsburgh, Night of the Living Dead with George Romero.
Yeah, George Romero.
Yeah,
I
and
know
then
John Russo, the guy who wrote it.
oh yeah, oh cool.
Yeah.
And you have the Pittsburgh guys that
Huh?
made that film, and then I just love that when we talk that this film has another Pittsburgh tie to with you in these cult horror films that have these connections to the Pittsburgh. I know Wes Craven is not from there, but I just thought that was an interesting sort of thread for.
There were some
And,
people. There were some people who were in Night of the Living Dead who I was at the Playhouse with. It's in acting school.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't remember their names now, but I remember back in the day when it was released saying, "Hey, I went to school with that guy or her."
Yeah. Well, I think it's Judith O'Dea is the lead actress.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's the one I know. She's from Pittsburgh, I believe.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, but but it's just kind of crazy that you have these films, and I know that one is in the Library of Congress now. So again, these
Yeah.
films that are now considered art. What's that point where that happens, that transition to something.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something. I learned in college that at least with reference to music, the thing that the definition of a classic or classical music actually is that which withstands the test of time, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I dumbfounds me about Last House is it's 50 years. You and I are sitting here talking about it. You know, other people, I do podcast after podcast. I do like 10 a month, and it's like mostly all Last House, and then woven my comedy career in with it. But there's some like this that they're strictly Last House. So I don't know, other than to say that it was a modern cautionary tale that the themes of which have no generational bounds, right? Like even though the film is dated visually, it is not dated emotionally.
Yeah.
And the thing that brings people back, from what I gather talking to fans at horror film conventions, is it's passed on from parent to child, who then becomes a parent passing it on to their child
Hmm.
as a standard caution. Like there are some people I've met where they say this is de rigueur in our family. You had to, you reach a certain age and we're starting to go out. You had to watch Last House on the Left because we wanted everybody in the family to know what happens if they fuck up and make bad decisions. That's and that's wow. Like I going back to the MoMA thing, the Museum of Modern Art thing, to have been part of Last House, even the small part that I was, although small but significant, I guess, um, to then travel with the film from drive-ins to the Museum of Modern Art, that's weird, you
Yeah.
know, because I had one of the, obviously, Casablanca, right? And so I have what I call my Casablanca moments in life, where I'm feeling something that Rick was feeling at some point during the film, right? Because he has several profound emotions that he confronts himself with. The first one, I believe, is when Ingrid Bergman walks into Cafe Rick the first time, and he looks at the piano player and says,
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
when I saw the ad for Last House at the Museum of Modern Art, I had a Casablanca moment, because I thought to myself, of all the thousands of fucking horror films that have been made and slasher films that made, they chose six, and one of the six, who
Yeah.
could who could have fucking, but you know, it doesn't make sense. But if you view Last House as a unique thing that created its own energy and moves along on its own energy, then I guess it would make sense, you know?
Yeah. I think one thing that is part of why the film works is, I mean, obviously you have like you said, it's rough. Like watching it, especially like some of the beginning when there's like they're trying to establish that she's the perfect girl and getting these sort of it's like this through very expositionally. There's like this overlapping dialogue, and it's kind of roughly made. It's in some ways you can clearly see it's a first film and it's made on film and all those things that make it of the time.
Mary Collingwood, Mary Collingwood, Mary Collingwood.
But then once you realize, oh, that stuff works to do what it needs to do. It establishes this is
Right.
this pristine girl who, and I think the a sort of aside to this that doesn't get credit is just the title, The Last House on the Left. Just such a brilliant title.
Just the marketing guys.
Yeah.
And had meetings, kicked a bunch of shit around, and collectively they came up with it.
Yeah, it just grabs in the perfect way because that right there, when you say Last House on the Left and it's a horror movie, you're scared already.
I
Like
don't know.
what?
Yeah, I guess. See, that's the thing, man. It's like it's charmed, right? It's without trying to be magical or anything. It's had a charmed existence,
Yeah.
because it should have just come and gone. It should have been, fucking dead. It should have been like, you know, not even good enough to have been transferred to video, right? But it's charmed.
And another, getting back to what I was saying though, is I think that you have the earliness of like Wes Craven as a filmmaker and creator, and especially with, thinking about the Wes Craven I grew up with and how things would go with the Freddy Krueger direction,
Right.
and then later with Scream, which is like him like inventing a genre and then reinventing it, 20 some years later, 30 years later, whatever it was. But with this movie, the thing that I realized watching it again, structurally, it's really smart because it's kind of like Psycho,
Mhm.
where you introduce the girl, and this is your that you
Right.
think is your main character, and then you kill her off, and then you realize it's almost like a twist that it's the parents' revenge story,
Right.
and that was really what probably why this a big reason why this movie holds up over other just type of slasher movies is that concept of like playing with a structure that works, but then sort of utilizing it in a bit of a unique way.
Well, I've gone back and forth over the years on what the film was actually about. You know, the ironically for me, the least it was about was the violence. Okay. And I've come to the conclusion based on the dinner scene, like I've dissected the film. Not remember I was there when every frame was being shot.
Yeah.
And I've had different and changing views over the years. I think what the film was a skirmish in the ongoing class warfare in this country. I think it was a violent skirmish of that. And the dinner scene is what leads me to conclude that. If you remember in the dinner scene, first of all, it was all shot in blacks. Like there was nothing around it. It was just the people.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, it was probably a budgetary reason that we did it that way, but it turned out to be extraordinarily powerful because the way Wes shot it, he kept having Hess look at the Collingwoods and then look at himself, look at their clothes and then look at his clothes, look at the things that they have. And so you got the feeling that I did anyway over the years, that this is the crux of it, that the crimes that these people were committing were superficially greed, but they were crimes of survival and crimes of vengeance because of class warfare, because they were the have-nots. These were the bottom of the barrel of the have-nots,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the Collingwoods represented the haves. And it just seemed to me that the reason for the crimes were this class warfare. So that's where I am presently on what it's about.
No, that scene definitely, when you say that, it really reflects that. And I think, a great film when I love to dissect the Stanley Kubrick's The Shining,
Mhm.
because and it's become like a scholarly field in particular. That film of, is it about the destruction of Native American culture? Is it about this? And for me, that film is about cycles of violence and these perpetual cycles of violence. And I see some of that in this film. But what is the potential question is, what's the root of that? What causes the cycles of violence? And I think that you're what you're saying is really on point, especially when you think about that sequence in that scene. And that leads me to, then you have you're essentially with like this very cultish little family, and you as the character of Junior though are probably the most interesting. Like you say, you're a small part of it, but you're the most, maybe not the most interesting, maybe the second most interesting character in the movie, but maybe the most important in a way, because you're kind of the soul of the bad guys. You're the
Yeah.
one who is conflicted by it. You're kind of like, it's like you're there out of obligation, but you don't like what's going on, but yet you don't necessarily stop it.
Well, I'm the one who knows this is wrong.
Yeah.
They don't seem to know it's wrong. It's for people like Krug, things are either convenient or inconvenient. And you know, I was the only one of the four of them who had any sense of right and wrong, and was just too weak character to do anything about it.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because then you're the idea that your character's too weak, and that Mary names you Willow and gives you the name Willow, which is totally reflective of that you are, but you're sure you're this sweet, caring person in Junior, but yet you're too weak to even do anything. It's like, just you just get stuck, and then because of that, we have chaos at the end.
Yeah.
What do you think? I know like some of the actresses have sort of disavowed the film, and what do you think of, like, I know obviously your relationship with it is different, but are they still, have you kept in touch with anybody, any of them?
The only person I keep in touch with is now is Jeremy.
Yeah.
And then Marty Cove whenever I see Marty. But I'm in touch with Jeremy. In fact, we're doing some podcasts together, and we're doing some conventions together. You know, I think whatever somebody's personal experience was is kind of how they're going to view the film.
Mm-hmm.
And if they had a good personal experience, and understood that it was really only a movie, then grow up and you look back and it changes, like I did. Hess, it changed for him. You get older, you look at things differently. I don't know. I've not talked to either one of them, to Lucy or to Sandra. I wish them well. They were lovely young ladies at the time. They were terrific. So, I can't speak for anybody but myself.
Yeah, that's just always an interesting dynamic with that, because that seems to be, from what I've read, that it's just this complete separation from it, and it viewed as a traumatic experience for them. And I can see that. And it's funny that hearing you say that is really helpful, because so when I started this idea, this podcast, a really good friend of mine is a art director, production designer, and works in film and television. And we went to USC together, and he's had a really good career. But one of his earliest jobs was this independent film, that the film is whatever. It was about like child prostitutes. It wasn't a great film, but I wanted to do a podcast about it because it's like a bad film that's worth talking about, and we have some interesting behind the scenes stories. Like, he was working as the art director, production designer, and I was just a PA on his little crew. And when I brought that up, he's like, I can't talk about that movie. He's like, I can't talk. He's like, that's the one thing I can't talk about that he's worked on. He's worked on tons of TV shows. He's worked on all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
He worked on a soap opera right before he got a job on the soap operas, right before they all shut down. There was one that moved from New York here to LA, and then he got a job on it. And then like a year later, they completely shut it down. I forget which one it was, and all these, that for whatever reason was a traumatic experience. He's like, nope, I can't do that one. And it really helps me to hear that, because I was like, well, like, you would think that what the film has become, it would make it okay, but you can't. That's just me from the outside looking at it that way. And when I think about it, reflect on it more personally, I kind of get it. So, what have you seen the remake?
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so my thoughts on that, I've kind of set to print. I was asked to do a compare and contrast by a British online horror film magazine called Cine Express, and I had not seen the remake, and I had to watch it now.
Yeah.
So I did, and the first thing that struck me was, being a longtime professional, was this was just a deal. This wasn't as much making a movie, because they'd made it in South Africa, and why go to South Africa if not for financial incentives? And I thought it was overproduced. I thought the director was competent, but was much more interested in shots than telling a story. And since Wes couldn't do shots, he had to tell a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I think, and I think that the actors, what the elements that made Last House have the effect that it has or had and continues to have, I guess. It was a combination of things. Number one, Wes didn't have a lot of money, so you had to shoot all the meat, right? You had to just shoot it in such a way that your primary objective was to capture the most important story shit that, to make the story work. It's like you said, simple story, structure's there, it works, right?
Yeah.
Because Wes focused on doing that. We didn't have a whole lot of money to spend, so everything was kind of like guerrilla on the day, which gave it even a more kind of like viscerally tense texture, right? The fact that there are no night shots, the fact that there aren't, that the we shot it in Super 16, single sprocketed Super 16, right? So it had a cinematic look. It had kind of a wide angle look, but that was because there was only one sprocket line. So there were, and all of us, the actors, we were all unknown. Nobody knew who the fuck we were. So we were anonymous. We weren't actor X playing this part. We were these people. It was the anonymity of us individually and personally made us more believable as that gang. I mean, there were so many elements that went into that, to Last House, that were either subtle or most people wouldn't even know to even think of, but they all combined to create what now exists on the screen. Making, as you know from film school, making films is even on a guerrilla level, is a complex process, because you have to be a slave to so many different masters simultaneously. And that's you're smiling because that's the thing you have. And what happens when films go on to become something other than what they started out as, that's because the film gods were smiling on the crew and cast, and they put everything in place as it needed. It just happened. It all just unfolded properly. There weren't any problems. It just happened, right? And once you wrap and you get everything, all your elements, then you go to work and you put it together, but you have to have captured all your elements, right? We were lucky. The chemistry between Freddie, Jeremy, David, and myself, right? For whatever reason, we were able to subtly and subconsciously convince the audience that we had all had a life before they started watching us. We had all done shit before, and this is a window into where we are now. So that's something that you can't predict. You just can't, right? You just can't. And all these four complex characters, all related to each one individually. So you have to just count the spider web of relationships there. There was Krug and me, right? Then there was me and Sadie. Then there was me and Weasel. Then there was Weasel and Krug. Then there was Weasel and, I mean, it's just all of and we were aware of all of this. And if you watch the film, you'll see the characters relating to the other characters in unique ways, other than the way they would relate to, like I talk to Sadie differently than I talk to Krug.
No, it's interesting too. Yeah, like I think that when comparing it to the remake and even just any like other films that came after that tried to then capture that, you can't, because it's just something that has to happen.
Magic. It's just, it's lightning in a bottle. And if you try to get it by overproducing something, you end up with, gilding a stupid lily, and that's
Yeah.
it. Just
For me, like I think when I like the next film that would maybe come close to capturing it would maybe be something like the Blair Witch Project, which captured that
yeah,
visceralness by using that video technology of the time in a similar
absolutely.
way. But that again, part of why that works is it's almost like the limitations help you
That's right.
get that real feeling. And then when you have, and what why that movie works is it's about those three characters interacting with each other. And that's what you have here. Why this movie works, and maybe not why it works, but why it holds up is not just the whole, the title, the cultural impact, the violence of it, is that it feels real. Those characters feel like real people, even when maybe they're not all the most experienced performers, and you'd all go on to maybe as grow it in that way. There's a real depth of reality to what you're doing.
Who directed Blair Witch?
That I don't know.
Who directed Last House?
Wes Craven.
Yes, it is.
There you go. And I feel bad. I feel like film school Josiah should be
I knew
disappointed
you
in me.
didn't. No, listen, I swear to you, I knew you didn't know. I set you
No, I wish I did, just so I could say, I got you there, Mark.
up.
But no, you're spot on with that point. And that's exactly it. And that's why, like when I mentioned a little bit earlier, you have Wes Craven would go on to make the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which were just iconic in a different way. And I think one thing Wes Craven had a great job of doing throughout his career with horror movies is, like I heard this was very loosely based on a true story. Do you know if that's true? I just read that, but the idea that maybe he read something where some hippie got killed and the parents killed, I don't know,
Oh,
but
no, this is that. No, the Last House was based on Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, which was based on a
oh,
12th century Nordic cautionary tale. That's where it came from.
okay. But point being is that visceral like reality of fear that's tied to this movie. Plus, you think about I know I saw an interview with Wes Craven about Nightmare on Elm Street where he read about these kids that were having these crazy nightmares and would try to stay awake, and the kid passed away and was drinking all this. He had a coffee machine hidden in his closet, and that was like the real inspiration that started those wheels spinning on, okay, what would cause that? And it was somewhere like in Southern California that this happened, and the kid, he wasn't haunted by the monster of the janitor or whatever Freddy was that came back with claw hands, but that was the real kernel of some truth. And the real kernel of some truth of that this could happen. And even with later on with Scream, where it was kind of a parody of his own sort of genre, but it's that, again, that reality that someone could kind of go mad and kill you essentially, with the very fundamental fear that he just tapped into. And that I guess, like, again, like you said, Wes Craven, he's the guy who invented these things, and everybody else just copied him.
That's why I asked you about the director. That's what I said about it being charmed, right?
Yeah.
That was the the first link in the charm.
One little sequence that I think is also, again, and this ties to when you said who directed that, and it's Wes Craven. There's the moment when the gang is like asleep in the house I think it's after the dinner,
right?
And it's that dream of like the parents come in the medical gear and the teeth. And I feel
Freddie did that. Freddie staged that.
Okay.
It was all him. He came up with that gag.
But that felt like a scene from a movie 10 years ahead of its time. And when that happened, it felt like, I mean, I guess we're talking about the whole Freddy Krueger dream stuff. Maybe there's a kernel of it here that then Wes Craven will be like, oh, I can take that and do other things with it.
Yeah, but Fred Lincoln, that was his idea to do that.
I thought that was the most sort of ahead of its time bit. And it's crazy to think like, we're giving Wes Craven all this credit. So it's cool to hear that where these things come from sometimes.
Look, Freddie Lincoln was the unsung hero of Last House.
Mm-hmm.
truth be told, he had more film experience than any of us, except the crew that we hired. But Freddie had done a bunch of porn movies as an actor and a director.
I
So
did read that. So
so while the activities are different and the action in the scenes is different, the cameras and the lights and sound fundamentally the same process, right? So Freddie knew how to stage things, knew where to put a camera and how to cheat certain angles, and he knew all that. And Wes, it was his first film. He's not expected to know everything, right? His job just to guide the story along. And Freddie, yeah, so Freddie was the one he came up with that and a couple of other things that then ended up being just terrific.
No, that's cool to hear, because I like that. I read that was something else I wanted to touch on in my notes, and I feel like that's, if you like when you compare like making porn today versus like everything now is like you shoot it on your phone, whereas when you're then working in any medium you have to work on film,
right?
And that's therefore like the stakes are always higher, because it's you've got this investment, whereas like if on my phone, if it doesn't go right, I can delete the file, whereas if you burn that film, if you waste that film, that's a much bigger deal.
And back in those days they were all doing it in 16 millimeter, and if they had to blow it to 35, they just blow the negative to 35, but it's mostly 16 millimeter stuff because the cameras were much lighter and easier.
But just interesting the way these things again come together, where it's the right people there's a bit of serendipity with things, where you have the Roger Ebert review, kind of like the thing that allows it to become.
Yeah, it's charmed. I tell you, man, it's like there's no other explanation. I don't mean like magic charm, but it just seems to have this thing that keeps it around and tickles my feather every now and then.
Mark, what do you think is next for Last House?
I think if past is prologue, right, then people will still watch it long after I'm gone, and generations will, as long as parents keep showing it to their children, it'll just keep going. It'll just be around. I mean, 50 years, for a film to be around 50 years and still be talked about, and discovered. I mean, that just tells you that, it stays on that trajectory. I guess it'll still be here.
Yeah. It's a pretty amazing thing though, like that you think about that, when just even when you watch it, you can see the grittiness of how it had to be made, and you can see the limitations in it, but that's part of the power that it has. That I mean, how many films were probably made that kind of look like that in the 70s?
But it's weird. It's like Casablanca moment, man, of all the films. No, this is the one that everybody, talks about.
So thank you so much, Mark, for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed. Check out the other video where we talked about Mark's career and his roots in Pittsburgh and going to New York, and how he got this film, which we didn't really talk about here, but how he landed this role, how that then propelled him in one direction, and then he needed to figure things out and became sort of a writer by, maybe you could say, faking his way into it, or
Not it. I totally agree with that.
But I think you can tell that you're just naturally a storyteller, and I'm sure you were before. You just had to learn the buzzwords, right?
This day, I think I'm a fraud, but I'm comfortable with it now.
So thank you for joining me once again. I really do truly appreciate your time. I enjoy hearing about these films, that especially something like this. Again, like I can't understate how or I'm sorry, I can't overstate, not understate. I can't overstate.
Understate it.
Yeah, or understate. I can understate it pretty easily, but I can't overstate how even before I saw this film, how much of a sort of aura it had, the reputation that it had was beyond anything. Because I always tell people, being from Pittsburgh, I always accepted, I would always watch zombie films because I had this in my head. I know those are made here, those are movies.
Right.
But this was an example of a movie that wasn't a movie. This is just too real to be a movie. Whereas Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, even other zombie movies, those are movies. For some reason, this, little Josiah's brain disconnect.
Not just you. Millions of other people felt exactly the same way. That's part of the legend of it.
Yeah. But it's just amazing that you have a film that is worth talking about, and we could dissect it. I'm sure there's classes that are taught on this that do dissect it and what it's about. Is it about the whole idea of the death of the innocence of the 60s hippie culture, what have you, on and on and on. But the really cool thing is that I got to have a conversation with someone who was there when this all happened, saw every moment of it, from getting cast in the movie to every moment of it when it was shot, to now the highlight of all that is talking to me via Zoom. But thank you once again, Marc. I hope to have you back some other time. We can talk about I would love to talk about some of your sitcom writing work in the future. Okay. But there's plenty to talk about. So thank you, Marc. Appreciate it.
Take care, Josiah.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.